The online seminar is developed for the YPO. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tanya Haas, and I am the Health and Wellness Writer here at Medcan. Before I introduce our presenters today, there are a few housekeeping items to cover. First, for our YPOers, we want to note that we have other professionals with interest in workplace wellness also on the line, as there was significant interest in the topic. This presentation is being recorded and will be made available at medcan.com under Medcan Insights. Audio-only conferencing is available by telephone by dialing into the number on the screen, also found in your registration and reminder emails. Regarding the audio, due to the volume of participants we have online and on the phone today, we will be muting all incoming audio to ensure clarity, which means we will not be able to hear you if you're sending questions.
The conference has been muted.
That being said, if you have questions throughout the presentation, you can submit your questions right here in the bottom of your screen to the left, right there, it's circled. And at the end of the presentations, our presenters will have time to address a few of the submitted questions, which are only seen by our presenters and will remain anonymous. Please note, it may be possible that we may not be able to answer all your questions given the time we have today. And finally, the information in this online seminar is for educational and information purposes only and is neither intended nor to be relied upon or to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis or treatment, or legal advice. With all that being said, I have the honor to introduce our presenters today. Dr. Gina Di Giulio obtained her doctorate in psychology at the University of Ottawa and earned a master's in law with a health specialization from Osgoode Hall, followed by a wide array of teaching, clinical, and practical experience. At Medcan, Dr. Di Giulio is the Director of Psychology. In her clinical practice, she sees clients for a wide range of conditions, including stress and anxiety, depression, and relationship counseling. She is often consulted on individual counseling, organizational psychology, as well as corporate and wellness programs. Janet Ozembloski. Janet joined Medcan in 2015 and has engaged in the practice of law for over 10 years. As a certified information privacy professional with the IAPP, Janet advises Medcan on all legal matters in the corporate and medical legal context. As privacy officer, Janet assists in policy and protocol development and the management of patient privacy at Medcan. Prior to joining Medcan, Janet worked with Chubb Insurance managing complex litigation in jurisdictions across North America. Before joining Chubb, Janet garnered several years of experience in her litigation practice, both at a private downtown Toronto firm and as a Crown attorney with the Department of Justice. She has completed both civil law and common law degrees at McGill University. Now, before we dive in, I'm going to give you the headlines on what we'll be discussing today. Our overall framework for organizations when it comes to mental health issues includes the characteristics of a proactive workplace, our recommended approaches when concerns arise, and understanding the employer's duty to accommodate. And to start off, I'll pass the microphone over to Dr. Di Giulio.
Thank you, Tanya. So first, I'd like to set some context on why being an organization that handles workplace mental health concerns well is important and necessary. So to give you a sense of scale, 500,000 Canadians will miss work this week and every week due to mental health issues or mental health illness. When we look at cost to a business, this may or may not be surprising to you. Mental health illnesses are one of the top 3 drivers of both short and long-term disability claims by more than 80% of Canadian employers. Mental health issues are undoubtedly in all of our workplaces right now, and it's cost us as a nation. 1 in 5 people in Canada experiences a mental health problem or illness in any given year, with a cost to the economy of well in excess of $50 billion. Which includes more than $6 billion in lost productivity costs due to absenteeism and presenteeism. So what we're doing for you today is offering you best practices for a workplace that is mental health ready. A ready organization has workplace conditions, respected and referenced policies, and procedures in place that allow for these best practices to thrive. So let's look at some of these best practices now. Number 1, encourage healthy relationships and two-way conversation. You want to establish a culture where two-way conversations happen readily and people know who they can be comfortable talking to about concerns. You want a culture where company leaders look out for concerning relationships outside of their direct reporting lines and address them, while ensuring that employees feel safe to speak up about these relationships. Number 2, watch out for potential psychological hazards. A culture that promotes trust, honesty, and fairness is likely going to have a psychologically strong workplace environment with a palpable sense of support and community. When there's minimal regard for employee loyalty, well-being, and job satisfaction, employees can interpret that as their being easily replaceable or dispensable, which can be a hazard. Obviously, effective leadership and clear expectations are more helpful than the alternatives. Be aware of job mismatch. So anyone who is a potential threat to the organization or a mismatch between an employee's skills and those required for the job. A workplace environment that does not provide for growth and development or that lacks recognition and reward is also potentially hazardous. Number 3, provide training in conflict management for healthier employee interactions. So this type of training is the first line of defense against a mentally unwell workplace. Have key staff trained in conflict management across all levels and all levels of power, including between peers and with superiors. Be sure to train them as to how to address conflict in situations that involve power dynamics. Provide support to frontline staff who deal with challenging customer interactions. Most unhealthy relationships will have an impact on your mental health in some fashion, and it is important to provide guidance on how to manage such relationships within the workplace. For example, regular group discussions that allow staff to discuss difficult workplace relationships safely. Number 4, consider implementing a mental health first aid program. So just as physical first aid is administered to an injured person before medical treatment can be obtained, medical health first aid is a mental health response that administers aid for emotional wounds and can assist with mental health workplace readiness training. Mental health first aid is an actual curriculum and certification that is provided by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Now, this program does not teach people how to be therapists, but rather it teaches people to recognize the signs and symptoms of a mental health issue, provide initial help, and guide a person towards professional help if required. So who should receive this type of training? Well, the obvious place to start is those within departments responsible for employee health and culture, such as HR, but don't forget all key managers of people. They can be trained as well. Those who are trained should then be designated as first responders who recognize and provide accommodation. They are not there to fix the problem. And one consideration is to ensure that the people who are designated to handle mental health concerns are people with strong EQ or emotional know-how, so that you have the best chances of successful interactions. It is important that key people and the company in general are aware of the resources available. So whether those resources are internal, such as peer groups or a team designated to help when issues arise, external, such as an employee assistance program, or if your company has an existing relationship with Medcan, we can be a resource too. At Medcan, we have embedded mental health screeners within our comprehensive health assessments, and our psychologists regularly conduct diagnostic assessments to screen for mental health concerns. So make sure that awareness of these resources is strong. This means regular and frequent communications beyond just the first day of hire, so that the types of help available are always top of mind. These resources will help ensure that a workplace is mental health ready. So now we'll discuss our recommended approach when signs of mental injury and illness arise within the workplace. So this is an excellent tool, the Mental Health Continuum Model. We have this on our website at medcan.com in our Workplace Wellness section. So this model categorizes symptoms of good to poor mental health under a 4-color continuum: green, healthy; yellow, reacting; orange, injured; and red, ill, and also removes labels associated with mental health and therefore stigma, which might make it easier to discuss mental wellness in the workplace. So rather than saying that someone has depression or an anxiety disorder, what the colors allow you to do is to talk in a neutral way about mental health without labeling. So if somebody says, "I'm orange today," you know that they have a series of characteristics of mental distress that aren't necessarily associated with a diagnosis. So I like the idea of the continuum because it reinforces the fact that there is no on or off switch when it comes to different stages of mental health. So the idea here is to catch and recognize the symptoms at the earliest time possible, and the earlier the problem is detected in treatment, the better the outcome. And the flip side of the continuum is recommended actions to take at each stage. And you'll see that the interventions and measures become more involved as you move to the right of the spectrum. So when should you approach an employee that you think is showing signs of mental unwellness? Well, approach when there is a notable change in performance or emotional demeanor over more than a few weeks. This allows the person reaching out to use measurable, objective observation to initiate the discussion. How to approach an employee? Well, most importantly is to approach in an open and kind way, coming from a place of concern. Do so in a way that the employee feels supported. We're trying to avoid judgment. Ask the employee what the employer can do to help. So that might mean time off, time to seek support, offset of workload, with the assurance that their job will be there when they are ready. And recognize that the employee may not accept help immediately, and it may require more than one try. So other aspects to consider when approaching an employee. If the employee chooses to stay at work, focus on their strengths and on what they do well. Help the employee to manage toxic relationships, so whether that is intervening with a difficult manager or adjusting their seating arrangements, and also be mindful that the employee may be impacting those around them. So be sure to attend to those possibly affected by the identified employee as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Di Giulio. There's some really valuable takeaways there, and I'd just like to go over them. So encourage healthy two-way communication between employees at all levels. Provide training and resources to help equip employees recognize those symptoms in their colleagues early on. And when approaching an employee, the guideline is to do so from a place of concern and support. So thanks again. Now we're going to turn to Janet Ozembloski for our legal perspective. Janet, I've heard you say in the past that related laws and policies are simply an extension of civility and being good humans. I look forward to what you have to share today.
Thanks, Tanya, and thanks for the introduction. I think that some people might look at mental health in the workplace and law as an unnatural marriage. People think of law as something that's very black and white and that we can read and understand pretty easily. I think the challenge in bringing a legal perspective to mental health in the workplace is that this is certainly not a black and white area. This is really an area where human values, dignity, and respect are at the core and what guides the legal principles in the law of accommodation. And in particular, today we'll discuss it in the context of mental health in the workplace. So as Tanya has mentioned, and as Dr. Di Giulio brought up in her presentation, the major legal principle at play in managing or looking at mental health issues in the modern workplace is the issue or the principle of accommodation. And one might ask, what does that mean? What is accommodation in the workplace? So I think we need to understand, and Dr. Di Giulio has pointed out, that people with mental health issues are a very diverse group, and they experience disability, potentially, and societal barriers in many different ways. The workplace is just one of the places in which we need to consider that. Disabilities, such as mental health issues or mental illness, are often invisible and episodic, and this brings the greater challenge to an employer in terms of how to manage this unique potential disability in the workplace. If someone has a physical disability and requires a wheelchair or certain physical accommodations that can be brought to the company with, changes in structure or changes in how the seating is arranged, those are generally easier to understand and manage. The challenge that's often faced by employers and why they often shy away from this issue is because mental health is something that's difficult to understand. Dr. Di Giulio has given us some great signs and understanding of where we can see potential mental health issues. But the truth is, a lot of people with mental health issues often do not even understand themselves that there's something that needs to be dealt with, or that they may be suffering with something that needs some help, support, or treatment. So because of this extreme stigma around certain types of mental health disabilities, many people are afraid to disclose that disability to others. If it's difficult for them to disclose it to family and friends, one can imagine how difficult it is to bring it to the fore in a discussion with their employer, with their boss, or with their peers in that workplace. And that's why Gina's topic on making sure that there are people that are trained in this and are comfortable, to talk about this with employees is critical in a workplace. It deals with this issue up front. Fear of discrimination can also result in people not seeking support for a mental health issue, either professionally or within their work context. So the Ontario Human Rights Commission has come out with something that I think guides this very well. Accommodation with dignity is part of the broader principle that our society should be structured and designed for inclusiveness. And that's where we're headed in the law on this, and that's where we're headed, I hope, as a society, and I think we are. So the principle of accommodation and the law which relates to this principle largely flows from human rights law and cases. In Ontario, we have the Ontario Human Rights Commission and the Human Rights Tribunal, and every province in Canada has similar bodies which are guided by a provincial human rights code. The duty to accommodate is a component of human rights case law. Employers must accommodate disabilities, and mental health is included in that definition. The Supreme Court of Canada, which is the highest court in the land, has proposed a test which says that every person with a disability must be accommodated individually. And I think that's the key takeaway. Every person must be accommodated individually. There is absolutely no one-size-fits-all solution in situations like these, and careful, sensitive consideration is demanded of employers. And although it is termed a duty, accommodation should truly be seen as a shared responsibility. And I think if we look at it as a responsibility as opposed to a duty, it's a far easier course to navigate, and it makes more sense to us all. We're like a family, we're in it together as an organization, and we're all going to work together to make things work for everybody as best as possible. And Gina gave us some excellent suggestions as to how we can do that in a proactive way. Everyone involved should cooperate, should share information, look for solutions together, and I think one thing that's key is not to judge. To just pull the judgment away and just work with what is, and let's make the best of it. The most appropriate accommodation is the one that respects the dignity of the individual with a disability, meets their individual needs, as I've mentioned, and best promotes the integration, full participation, and ensures confidentiality. The confidentiality issue is something we could talk at length about. We don't have the time, but truthfully as employers, that must be respected. And that does require consideration, making sure that any discussions, documents exchanged are treated with confidentiality in a professional manner. And let me just make one thing clear if the duty to accommodate seems daunting. It's not for the employer to solve the mental health concern, and Dr. Di Giulio pointed that out, but to focus on making the workplace work for the individual up to the point of undue hardship. So here's our second legalese type of term for the day, undue hardship. The question is, when is that undue hardship reached? When does the employer say, I've done everything I can to accommodate this employee? When do I no longer have to do that? And I think that we need to look at three criteria. If the cost is prohibitive to do it, if there are no sufficient outside sources of funding, and if there are health and safety requirements where that accommodation would impinge on anyone's else health or safety in the workplace, that's when the employer can say, I cannot do any more, I've tried my best. Of course, there's lots of case law on when that is reached in different contexts, but those are some guiding principles for everyone to take away today. What is not a duty to a defense to accommodate is business inconvenience. In other words, someone say, oh, that's just too much trouble, I don't have time, I don't have the resources. In this day and age, that's not good enough. Everyone needs to put their best foot forward and make an effort to make it work. And employee morale is also not a defense. In other words, just because this is difficult on people, there's a point at which everyone needs to pitch in and try to be creative and work towards a solution to accommodate that employee. Accommodation is a process. It's not a overnight solution, and it is a matter of degree rather than an all or nothing proposition. And just as Dr. Di Giulio gave us a mental health continuum, there is similarly an accommodation continuum. At one end would be full accommodation that respects the person's dignity. Next is phased-in accommodation over time, and that's followed by appropriate accommodation only being implemented once reserve funds have been set aside. The good news is that many accommodations can be made extremely easily and at very little cost to an organization. For example, flexibility in workplace hours or work leave is one way. Facilitating an employee's access to a support program, a treatment program, treatment in general, and allowing that person time off to attend. A couple of hours or a few hours a week for a while is a small price to pay for helping that person out and becoming a better person and employee. And depending on the circumstances, job restructuring is also something that can be done. The cost of acting and accommodating early on is far less than the multiple costs financially and organizationally of not acting. And speaking from personal experience as a former litigation lawyer, and I hate to bring this in, but legal proceedings and litigation will always take their toll, both on employees and employers, especially with someone who may be suffering from mental health issues. The last thing they need is to feel their only recourse is to bring legal proceedings against an employer. And so, having seen it come to that, I would suggest to all employers that they have the difficult conversations early on, that they take Gina's suggestions very seriously and work towards making their organization healthy in a way that honors everybody's dignity. And in those cases where there are situations where you have people who potentially have mental health issues, deal with them soon, upfront, and in a professional way, and it's going to go a lot better.
Thank you so much, Janet. Lots of great information there. Good thing this will be on our website so you can review it again next week for sharing these tips. Now, we're going to now turn to a case study to see how the duty to accommodate can unfold. Dr. Di Giulio, I understand you worked with a client and a company where this was practiced in an efficient and effective way. Would you be able to walk us through that case study right now?
Absolutely. So in this situation, I worked with an executive from a professional firm who had been diagnosed with depression, and we felt that in this case the company handled it in the best way possible. So first, the employee spoke with an HR professional within her organization. The HR professional was well trained in mental health issues and was excellent as the first-line resource. The company's HR leader engaged in helpful conversations regularly with the employee. And the second best practice to recognize was that this executive was provided accommodation. So as the employee's signs of depression progressed along the continuum, the company paid for psychological treatment with me at Medcan. They received updates from me with the employee's consent, which created a team environment of support. Now, eventually, the employee was provided with short-term disability so that she could focus on getting better away from her triggering environment.
Thanks, Dr. Di Giulio, and I would just add to that this was a case study in a scenario where everybody did what they should and the outcome was great. The organization met their duty to accommodate, and they were an informed organization that really contributed to the personal and legal obligations that they had. It wasn't just following good legal principles, it was just being good human beings.
Thank you so much, Dr. Di Giulio, Janet. Lots of helpful lessons to be learned here. Now, at this point, I'd like to be mindful of the time. It is 11:30. We do have some questions. Thank you so much for everyone who must step away now, but we will be online for about 5 more minutes. We'd like to encourage all those who are online and can stay with us to submit questions, which we will address. Questions are completely anonymous, and your names will only be viewed and shared by the presenters. We will not be saying who is asking what. Our presenters believe these are excellent Canadian resources for leaders who are seeking more information. Dr. Di Giulio asked that we emphasize the first, that's the Mental Health Commission of Canada. It's an excellent resource. And Janet has noted in particular that the website for the Ontario Human Rights Commission has a lot of valuable information. Now, if you'd like to stay informed on valuable resources and education offered by Medcan on workplace wellness topics, such as this seminar, we invite you to go to medcan.com/business. This is what the page looks like. And at the very bottom of the page, you'll find a form to sign up for communication updates. And ahead of questions, I will take a moment to mention how Medcan supports leaders and employers like yourselves in the area of mental health. Those on the line may already be aware of our year-round care service, where the individual meets with a family physician for urgent and everyday medical care, either in person in our Toronto clinic or virtually across the country. Year-round care is an important component of our solutions for employers. We find that 10 to 15% of year-round care appointments, both virtually and in person, are linked to a mental health concern, amongst other concerns such as musculoskeletal issues or strep throat, for example. Now, employers have told us that this service has led to reduced absenteeism and presenteeism, boosting overall productivity. Employees, especially through the video visits, have a discreet and easy way to see a physician without needing to leave work. And when helpful, the Medcan team is well prepared to connect your employee with psychology support within Medcan or external support such as addiction management, marriage counseling, caregiver support, or other types of specialized care. Year-round care is an effective frontline service to support mental health concerns as they surface. All right, question time. Now we do have a few questions. The first one, Dr. Di Giulio, I'll direct to you. You spoke about approaching employees from a place of concern. What if that person does not think they have a mental health issue? How does one do that?
Well, they don't necessarily have to know that they have a mental health issue. In fact, I would say that this happens more often than not. To the person approach from a place of concern. So you can use I statements such as, I have noticed that you haven't been your usual self, or that you haven't been as productive as lately, or as you usually are. Right. Focus on the behavior, not necessarily the emotional demeanor. Okay. So bring it back to the behavior, and then you can always offer accommodations if required, or you can offer that the person perhaps speak to someone on a one-time basis just to see if there's anything else going on that might be important for the employer to know, so that they can provide further accommodations. So I say again, always come at it with a point of empathy, concern, not confrontation. You can offer to connect the person with additional resources, but focus on the behavior, not the emotional demeanor.
All right, that makes sense. Janet, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing to that. I think that it's important for whoever has that to discussion to be chosen carefully. And as Dr. Di Giulio mentioned earlier, having a person with a really strong EQ and someone who's your best pick to have that type of difficult discussion is always key. It doesn't necessarily have to be their direct manager. And again, this is slightly a legal perspective. It doesn't have to be the person who manages the person. In this case, it might be your better choice just to have the most appropriate person who's got the best listening ear and the best EQ to have that discussion.
Thank you very much, Janet. Thank you, Dr. Di Giulio. That is all the time we have today. I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today, and I hope you did find it valuable. It will be on our website in the coming days, and we do have a contact information at the bottom of this slide. So if you have any questions, you can email exechealth@medcan.com. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone.